just returned from a long engagement in France and a short marriage in Spain. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Surrealist Woman.
So sinks the sun, and I'm looking for the one who can fall upwards in love. It's like a glove and truly can see me. Here I am, always in love, yet I'm with a broken heart, roaming through the darkest night, though sunniest noon be shining worse than death of flight. Going where you lead, going where you lead me, coming where you need, coming where you need me. Yielding to your lips caress, smiling where you plead, I will answer, oh yes. People say reality must rule us, but that is the nightmare of a dreamer, feeling blue for being a redeemer. Guns keep the worst jump to a woman, surrealist. I ain't doing it alone. No, 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 I grab my lobster phone.
Hello?
To bring the only one to me.
Oh, it's you. What can I do for you today, dear?
A party is needed,
okay,
like a starbeam cleaving out the storm. A vision so pure in for my desolate longing, lace with its heaven-sent rays. Going where you lead, going where you lead me, coming when you need, coming when you need me. Yielding to your lips caress, smiling when you plead, I will answer, oh yes. Man can dream, I can create. What man can create, I can destroy. I am the muse who unbinds the madness. I am the mother who births the monsters. I'm the end that is the beginning. I'm not the first, nor the last, but I'm the only one that is for you and you alone. Going where I lead, going where I lead you, coming when I need, coming when I need you. Yielding to my lips caress, smiling when you plead, I will answer, oh yeah.
Love a good song. If I hear one, I'll let you know.
Hello, how's everybody doing? Good to see everyone today. I'm TJ, I'm the program coordinator here at the library. It's wonderful to see you all on a Friday. We don't usually do a program on a Friday, but we're really grateful we were able to get fit into Josh's book tour, and so that he could be here today. So it's terrific, and he's going to have some special guests, which I'll let him introduce. But as always, I just want to welcome you. I want to make sure I thank Follett Books. They're in the back, so if you are interested in a copy of Josh's book, and some other books that we have, they'd be happy to help you and very much appreciate them being here today. And I believe you guys will be willing to sign some books afterwards, so they'll be in the back of the room. But this is, so when Josh first emailed me, I get to see a lot of cool stuff. Like, my job is very cool. I get so many different opportunities to share with the community interesting things. When he first emailed me, it was very hard to understand what this program was. And it's remained difficult to describe this program, but it is absolutely fascinating, so much so that I wish I could read every single book cover to cover and watch every film that we show. Unfortunately, I just can't do that. I did pick up this book when I got here this morning, and I did not get back to my desk until I had to come here and set up. It absolutely drew me in, and it's just a fascinating piece of work. So I want to go ahead and introduce our main speaker today, Josh Frank. He's a writer, producer, director, and composer. He's the author of Fool the World, the oral history of a band called Pixies, In Heaven Everything is Fine, and co-author of the illustrated novel The Good Inn. He is also the one who has built, owns, and operates the Blue Starlight Mini Urban Drive-In Movie Theater in Austin, Texas. I think you guys are in for a treat today. Help me welcome Josh Frank.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. This is really exciting. I'm so excited to be here today. I gotta say, me and Robert Bader, who's here with me, who I will introduce in a bit, we did an event in New York City a couple weeks ago at the Quad Cinema, right in the center of New York City. And it was sold out, but we have more people here today in Rancho Mirage, so wow, okay? That's really... So I'm here to tell you about Giraffes on Horseback Salad. As my friend Robert Bader will attest, my presentation is usually about 6.5 hours long, but I'm going to get it down to 20 minutes today because I really want to share as much time as possible as I can with my friends and guests, Robert Bader and Bill Marx, who's also here today, which I'm just, I'm overjoyed about. So when I was 8 years old, I became a Marx Brothers fan. My friends did not understand this at all, so I had to make new friends. And I found 2 other friends who became my Chico and Groucho to my Harpo. But I've been a Marx Brothers fan since I was little. So sitting here today with Bill Marx here with me and Robert Bader and all of you, it's like, it's like seeing the Beatles, but in reverse, and not the Beatles, but the Marx Brothers. So I grew up loving the Marx Brothers, and after college, I really got into telling lost histories. I found it really fascinating that there's all these amazing stories that are not on the front cover of magazines or newspapers, or when people talk about major events in history that have to do with pop culture, they focus on sort of one thing that everyone can kind of key into and be like, yes, that's where this started. But I always kind of was fascinated with the layers below that. And that's what led to my first 3 books. One was about alternative rock, one was about sort of the crossroads of Hollywood and the music scene in LA in the 70s and 80s. And then the third one I collaborated with the lead singer of the Pixies, this band, the Pixies, who had an idea about a lost film. And that's when I got into lost movies. So when we were finishing that one, and that one had a lot of visual elements, so we had an illustrator that we worked with, and I loved that. I come from a film background, so the idea, I always wanted to make these big epic movies, but they kind of cost money. And so I needed to figure out a way to make my big epic movies without it costing anything, and from like, a 300 square foot room with a computer, and that's it. So when I did this third book and we had an illustrator, I was like, that's my cinematographer, and I was kind of really getting into this idea about, how do you can you tell a movie in a book? Like, how far can you go with that? And so I started searching the internet for great unmade movies. And because I thought if I found like a great unmade movie by someone who I really respected and appreciated, that would be like a great next book. And I could work with an illustrator, and I could kind of get into this idea of like putting a movie on the page in some way that could never have been made as a movie or wasn't for some reason or another. On all of these lists, there was a number of movies that kept repeating. There was a Werner Herzog film about the birth of Mexico. I passed on that because I just, I didn't, how many people really want to, read a movie by Werner Herzog about, the Mexican Revolution. Same went for Kubrick's Napoleon movie. It was supposed to be amazing, but I just couldn't imagine people really getting into that sort of thing. There was a number of others. There was Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, which was a sci-fi movie. That one I really thought would be great, but he wasn't willing to give it up yet. He still believes he can make it. But also on all those lists was a movie called Giraffes and Horseback Salad, written by Salvador Dalí, supposedly, for the Marx Brothers. And I saw this on a number of lists, and having been a Marx Brothers fan my whole life, I was surprised I'd never actually heard about it before. And I took note of it, but when I looked, the reason I sort of, at that first moment of seeing it on these lists, didn't jump right into maybe this could be my next book, or was it didn't seem like there's really any other information about it anywhere except on these lists, and but these amazing, powerful delusions of grandeur started entering my dreams. I could make a Marx Brothers movie, I could be that guy. And that kind of kept me going back to maybe there's more material than just on these little lists. And so that's when I started digging in and actually looking to see if there was more than just these little paragraphs about this obscure, possible, maybe movie that Salvador Dalí wanted to make with the Marx Brothers. There just wasn't a lot out there. But the idea of being able to find a great lost story that had to do with my favorite, my favorite people, entertainers, comedians. I mean, the Marx Brothers were tied to everything that I loved. And so I started doing some of my sleuthing, and I first contacted the Dalí Foundation in Spain, and I asked them if there was any other material, besides this paragraph that I keep finding that describes a surreal woman who can change the fabric of space and time by bringing her dreams into the world, but only as long as they're completely surreal. And she falls in love with the Spanish businessman played by Harpo. And then there's something about a Groucho dancing with a woman, the rumba, and then he takes a spoon and he spoons her cheek out as he's dancing with her and offers it to a midget. And, it didn't look like it was going to go anywhere with these initial things, but I was like, maybe there's more. I think in any other situation I would have been like, there's not more, but again, these delusions of grandeur, this idea that, but if I can find more, then I could make a Marx Brothers movie. And so the Dalí Foundation said, well, yeah, actually that paragraph was taken from this volume of Dalí's writing and his film writing, but unfortunately it's out of print. We do have 3 copies, but it's in Portuguese. So I said, great, send me a copy. I figured, how hard could it be, Like, I had a whole plan. I'll look through it, and I'll find the word Marx, or I'll find the word Harpo. And if that's in there, then the pages that have that I'll have translated. So the volume comes, and it's 875 pages long. And 3 months later, I get to page 840, and there's the word Harpo. It's there! And it was mentioned on 5 or 6 pages. So I went onto Craigslist, and I hired a Portuguese translator to translate these 6 pages. And what was exciting is there were 6 pages of material now. And not enough for a book, but there was more there, and there was more of a story. It was clear that he had a very specific vision for this. So I reached back out to the Dalí Foundation, and I said, okay, so where did this stuff come from? Could this stuff from this volume have come from a larger, lot? And they said, well, actually, yes. There's a chance that there might be more at a museum in Paris, which bought this lot of Dalí's handwritten notes, and that's where those were taken from. So I reached out to the museum in France, and they said, yes, there is more. And I said, can you send it to me? And they said, no, but you're welcome to come look at it. And I said, well, I'm in Austin, Texas, and I'm a starving artist, and my wife would divorce me, so what can we do? And they said, well, we really don't share it. And I said, well, let me ask you this. When was the last time someone looked at it? And they said, about 40 years ago. I said, all right, well, guess what? I want to look at it right now. And the woman was very nice. She actually sent me PDFs, and there were 80 pages. And they were handwritten in French. So that's when I went and I hired a French translator. And the French translator, I sent him the pages. He was a friend of mine, luckily, because I sent them to him, and he wrote me back, and he said, Josh, there's a little problem. I can translate this, but I'm going to have to translate it twice. And I said, why? He said, well, Dalí's French is really weird. And I said, well, okay, I mean, how hard can that be? He's like, it's really weird. So a couple months later, he'd gotten through the 80 pages, and what he did was he sent me first the Dalí French to regular French translation, and then the regular French to English translation. And I was a little worried because I was like, oh, it's going to look like a lot, but it's really not. He sent me over like 120 pages of this stuff. So in total, there was about 60 pages. And it was a lot of material. It was a lot of story. It was a lot of character. It was a lot of ideas. And that's when I realized there's enough material here to do something with. And that's when I reached out to the Marx Brothers estate, and I reached back out to the Dalí estate, and I told them what I wanted to do. And both of them didn't know what to do with, with what I was offering. They didn't. When Robert comes up, he can tell you some. He's had a couple of very funny things since we started doing these talks about his response to my idea. But they all were intrigued because, this was like some material from the Marx Brothers and from Dalí that no one had really come up with any thought of something to do with it, and I had. I think that they were interested in seeing what I do with it, but I think they were pretty sure I couldn't pull it off. So that was the beginning of my 6-year journey writing Giraffes on Horseback Salad, which has turned into a graphic novel and illustrated biography of Harpo and Dalí's friendship that led to Dalí deciding to write a movie for the Marx Brothers. And I'm super excited to share a little bit with that with you today. But before we go any further, I think it would be a good idea for us to meet the characters.
And now I want you to meet the sweetest little thing in the whole wide world.
We fool you good, eh? open and a Fig Newton ended.
How do you do?
Say, buddy, could you help me out? I'd like to get a cup of coffee.
One of the most colorful people I know. Odd is another word that's been applied. But he is a man who once said about himself, the only difference between myself and a madman is that I am not mad. We'll see. Will you welcome, please, Salvador Dalí. How do you do? Well, I think you've caught something. I can't help noticing that you have an anteater with you, Mr. Dalí. Oh, please.
Dalí no like it child, no like it at all butterfly is, and no like it animals of any kind. Only it.
You only...
Ants and violent rhinoceros.
Right off.
Rhinoceros.
Am I alone in finding you somewhat difficult to follow in terms of what your theories are? Do people often misunderstand you or find you hard to...
No, but this is absolutely
it's
normal.
Interesting, but
because
it's...
myself work in my surrealism for 14 years, and today no understand nothing of my work.
No one understands your work today?
No, a lot it is absolutely legitimate that other people also no understand. Because if myself don't understand, the other will understand less.
If I had said hello, Dalí, when you came out, would you have been offended?
I don't know.
It's an old joke, I expect.
I'm never offended because all time the jokes create one tremendous indifference in my life. You know, I'm tragical, and the jokes appear me tremendous quantity of vulgarity in any jokes. Dalí never jokes.
Do you like jokes?
No. For this choice, the only intelligent animals is the rhinoceros and the ants. Because the cats, the dogs is the more vulgar and catastrophic animal that exists.
Yeah. Yeah, well.
This is the only way to travel, boys. The only way. I was going to bring along the wife and kiddies, but the grocer couldn't spare another barrel.
I was going to bring my grandfather, but there's no room for his beard.
Why don't you send for the old swine and let his beard come later?
I sent for his beard.
You did?
Yeah, it's coming by hair mail.
Either he's dead or my watch has stopped. Wait. Hey. Don't throw that. That's only for long distance.
All right, come on, let's go. What's the matter?
Then what do you want? Would you like a suite on the third floor?
No, I'll take a Pollock in the basement.
Well, you'll have to take that up with the commissary department. That's an entirely different proposition, and I can... Here you are. Let me help you here. I'm sorry. The afternoon mail isn't in yet.
So, the Marx Brothers, Harpo, and Salvador Dalí. Of note, Salvador Dalí was much older in the clip I showed you than when he met Harpo. He was actually a young man in his, I believe, his 30s when he actually met Harpo. But I had to show that clip partly because Robert gave it to me, and it's awesome. But also, as I think Robert knew, it really showcases exactly how Dalí was. And so in 1936, Harpo was on a European press tour for Night at the Opera, and Dalí heard he was in Paris. and was going to be at this certain party. And so Dalí went to the party in order to meet Harpo, because Dalí was a huge fan of the Marx Brothers. He thought that the Marx Brothers were surrealism in human form, and he thought that Harpo was, just the total surreal package. And Harpo was his favorite. As Groucho once said about how Dalí felt about Harpo, Dalí loved Harpo, but in a nice way. And so they met at this party, and neither of them could speak the other's language, so they just sort of stood there smiling at each other, and they seemed to hit it off that way, because after Harpo went back home, they became pen pals. And let me get my little slide going. So yeah, they met at a party and they became pen pals. And Dalí sent Harpo a Surrealist harp. That was a harp with barbed wire instead of strings, tuning forks that were made of spoons and wrapped in cellophane. Harpo sent a picture back with his hands bandaged, smiling in front of the harp, and said he loved it. He also sent this letter along saying, I'd be happy to be painted by you if you ever come to America, and I would love to paint you as well. And Dalí was thrilled with this, so in early 1937, he went to California, here, and Dalí painted Harpo. How cool is that? It's this crazy cool story, and Dalí, this was sort of the most famous of the pictures that he drew of Harpo, and it's beautiful. And it was at this time that Dalí started getting his own delusions of grandeur, he could take over Hollywood. And I think if he was around now, he could. Basically Tim Burton would basically finance anything Dalí came up with. But at the time, the studio execs, Dalí just wasn't their thing. But Dalí really thought that he could he had this vision. He was going to make this surrealist masterpiece starring the Marx Brothers, huge, big, ambitious film. And he was going to call it Giraffes on Horseback Salad. And it was here in California and in actually some... So in the notes that I got from the museum, what was really cool is he wrote all of his ideas for Giraffes on Horseback Salad on hotel stationery. So every page from the museum actually had documentation on it of where he wrote the ideas for giraffes, some of which were hotels around here. In Hollywood, and I looked up the hotels, many of which are no longer around, but there are their own histories of these hotels. So it was really exciting because I was really starting to see, oh wow, there's this whole hidden story here. I can track this. I can understand more of what Dalí was going through at that time in his life. I can figure out what, all this stuff, and there's great material here for a great story. Not to mention, Dalí wanting to make a movie in Hollywood at this time in his life, it was very revealing about where he was in his life at that time as an artist. And his friendship with Harpo, I felt, there was a story there that hadn't been told about Dalí with that as well. So there was all this historical stories that could be told, and I was starting to find there was enough material to actually adapt his movie into this cinematic book idea that I had. And so Dalí and Harpo spent a number of months with Dalí writing these notes and Harpo probably honking his horn saying, great. They still couldn't speak the same language. The only reason they actually could do any sort of word communicating was because of their wives. Gala and Susan both spoke German, and so they could talk to each other and tell each other what the other was trying to say to the other one. So I wrote it. Thank you. Good night. No. I spent 6 years writing this book, and I'm not going to go too much into detail of the mechanics of how I wrote the book because I want to save the time to bring Robert and Bill up in a minute. But I did want to tell you this one story about my last visit to Rancho Mirage when I first came and met Bill Marx and showed him the first couple pages of Giraffes and Horseback Salad. First of all, it was one of the coolest moments of my life. But secondly, I was invited into Bill's house, and when I walked in, I imagined that there would be a lot of Marx Brothers memorabilia, but there wasn't actually. What there were dozens and dozens and dozens of paintings on the walls. And I was like, does someone paint? Who's the painter? And Bill's like, my dad. And that blew my mind. I was like, wait, Harpo painted? And he's like, yeah. And, I actually thought that maybe I was the only person that didn't know that, but over the last couple of months as I've done these events, I've asked the audience, did you know that Harpo painted? And only 2 or 3 people in the audience have raised their hands each time. How many people knew that Harpo painted? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it makes sense that more people here know that. You guys are like clearly ahead of the curve with the rest of the world in many ways. But still, that's not a lot of people, right? So it's pretty cool. So I have some pictures that I took of some of the paintings from the collection because it blew my mind that in the letter when he wrote, Dalí, come and paint me, I'll paint you, I thought he was joking, but he was serious. He really cared about painting, and he worked really hard to create, to sort of master different types of painting. And I just think that's so beautiful. And again, it kind of was something that I felt was revealing about this story of Harpo and Dalí, of why Harpo would be so, gracious. This one's really crazy. This is my favorite Bill. It's the most surreal one in the collection. It was the only one that was like really wacky. I love this one. Oh, this is Harpo. So, yeah, Bill, I took this picture. I hope that's okay. Marx Brothers fans, if you're a real Marx Brother fan, you'll have a picture of Harpo over the toilet. It's a thing I've discovered. 4 different huge Marx Brothers fans have Harpo over their toilet, so take note of that. It's a thing. So Harpo painted, and I thought that was really, that actually helped me a lot with writing this book, because it made me realize that there was a true camaraderie between Harpo and Dalí. So that's my little introduction. And now I would like to bring, I'm just thrilled to announce and welcome Bill Marx and Robert Bader to the stage to join me to talk about the Marx Brothers and Harpo and everything.
It's your microphone. You're going to put this in. Where does that go?
Right in here.
I'll put that in your pocket. There you go.
Oh, that was wonderful.
I'll do it again later.
There we go.
Hey, Josh.
Hello. Hello.
I'll just say Josh has been to my house, and I do have the Marx Brothers over a toilet, and I'm really grateful he didn't show a photo of that today.
That wasn't your toilet.
But I do have a Go West poster over a toilet
yes,
in my house.
Do.
Yeah, thank you for telling everyone.
Yeah. Oh, I've been telling everybody. I think it's the coolest thing.
Well, one day when you grow up, you'll have a Marx Brothers picture over your toilet.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm not there yet, though. Okay. I don't think I'm ready for it.
Josh?
Yes?
Bill's brought a surprise for you.
Oh.
For the people out there.
Nice.
I thought it would be a nice thing if I could figure out.
Do you need help undressing that?
That's the one.
It's pretty different than all of Harpo's other paintings.
Yeah, it's the best.
It is pretty Dalí-esque, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It's the most unusual. Well, forget about by Harpo. It's probably the most unusual painting I've ever seen by anyone.
Bill,
and I've got books full of Dalí paintings. And
Bill, can I just say you're the coolest? That is the coolest thing that you brought that. I've been singing its praises across the country.
Before you all leave, just walk up close to it and take another look at
Yeah.
it. It's just insane.
It's totally not.
Harpo out Dali's Dalí.
And appropriately touch it if you want.
Yeah.
Or inappropriately, if that's your thing. So I want to say something about when I mentioned this to Bill, and we both sort of said, the guy who wants to do this must be a little crazy. And I said, well, that's probably going to help him. Because it just, and I didn't know what to do with the request at first, because people are always calling, and I help Bill with the Marx Brothers licensing and management. And a lot of people call us with these nutty ideas. It's some guy who wants to do some, drastically crazy TV musical about something with Harpo, or, you get all these requests that don't sound like anything. But as a guy who's researched the Marx Brothers for most of his life, I had read Giraffes on Horseback Salad as a movie treatment probably 30 years ago, and said, I either read this again right now to see if I can understand it, or I just put it on the shelf and forget about it. And I put it on the shelf and forgot about it, because it's pretty unreadable in the form that Harpo read it. And Harpo must have looked at it and said, I don't know what the hell to do with this. And he just kind of filed it away, and Bill found it years later. It makes no sense. And I'm so glad to have Bill here, because I wanted to talk a little bit about his mom, who I knew well, and she was wonderful. But when Susan first got wind of this idea with Dalí, I think she was kind of in the same camp as being a little, well, why don't you talk about your mom a little bit? She's your mother.
My mother was as interesting and as special as a person as Harpo was. She finally got him to marry her after she chasing him for 4 years, where it was normally my dad would be chasing the women. And she hated show business. She was in it for a good 15, 20 years. And then all she wanted was a family. And she finally got Dad to marry her. He was already 48 years old. Not only did he get to marry her, but he also got to have a family, which is what she really talked him into. And as time went on, I have 2 brothers and sister. They all moved down here to the valley and went through the school system here. And my mother became a very important person with regard to education down here, and a deeply committed lady to doing good things for people. And as nice and as unusual as all the Marx Brothers put together. Susan Marx is really a name that you all should read a little bit about. Fascinating person. And Rob got an opportunity to work with her on her autobiography.
Yeah, I mentioned that. The 3 of us were on the Gilbert Gottfried podcast, which debuted last week. And we talked a little bit about this, and I've since gotten a whole bunch of inquiries about the existence of this manuscript. And it was never quite finished, but I worked with Susan on her memoirs, and what Susan loved about the project was not revealing herself so much, but she loved working on it. And unfortunately, when she passed away, we weren't quite done with it, at least to her satisfaction. But I did get to ask her a lot of very specific things, and I'm interested in things about the Marx Brothers that are not known. I wrote an entire book about their vaudeville years, for example, which hadn't really been explored. And, things in my book, like there's a whole chapter on 1913, and there could have been a whole book on 1913 if I went a little nuts. So when you look at something under a microscope like the Marx Brothers, there's so much there that isn't known. The Dalí treatment and, potential movie is one of those things where if I thought I could do a whole book about 1913, well, this guy did a whole book about like 5 minutes in 1936. So I was very curious about it, and I asked Susan very specifically. And at first, she didn't want to talk much about it. And I found that a little curious, because the things she usually didn't want to talk about were her own movie career and her own days as a Ziegfeld Follies girl and all that stuff. She said, it was just a bunch of junk. Her whole show business career, in her mind, was a bunch of junk. So when I finally got her to give me her opinion of the Dalí thing, it's one of those things where you could put it on the back of the book with her name as a blurb, except it wouldn't help you sell books, because she said, what a complete piece of crap. So I actually suggested to Josh, maybe put that on the back of the book.
Robert called me and said, I've got something for you. I found this thing from Susan. She talks about the Dalí thing. I'm going to send it to you. I was so excited, I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so great. And he sends me this clip, and I waited to listen to it because I wanted to enjoy it, So I waited till my wife and my kid were asleep, and I sat down, and I was like, okay, and I pressed play, and there's Robert's voice, and he's like, so tell me about, the Dalí and Harpo script, Giraffes on Horseback Salad. And then there's this moment of silence, and she goes, well, it was complete nonsense, And she basically, spent about 30 seconds more until it was over talking about how it was just a total waste and just, yeah. And I stopped and I turned it off, and for a second I had this sadness and this feeling of, well, that was unfortunate. And then I realized, this is great. I can use this. And it's in the book. It's in the book.
I knew I had something, but I didn't recall. I had it on a cassette that was made in, I think, October of 1995. And I had used those tapes a long time ago in writing a manuscript with Susan while she was around. And I hadn't revisited that in quite a long time. So I had to go through a couple of hours of it until I found the stuff about Dalí. But she also said something about the visit to the house. Mm-hmm. And the phrase was, Harpo and Dalí communicated with their eyes. And they would just have these gestures and looks at one another. And Susan's description of that I thought was good. Yeah. I thought that was really charming.
She also, she actually did, besides saying that my whole idea for my book was crap, she actually said some other things too. And she said that, and she also said, the thing that I thought was really very cool, and again, it really helped me, to create a story for these guys in the book, is that she said she found it really interesting how Dalí drew Harpo.
Yeah,
remember that part?
She thought, well, first of all, Dalí also drew Groucho, and there was, if you want to see those in really good shape, try and find a copy of, I think it's the August 1939 Theater Arts magazine, where they're reprinted in glossy, beautiful form.
Some of them are in the back of my book.
Or go to the National Portrait Gallery in Washington and take a look at them.
If you want to see them big.
Yeah, if you want to see the real ones, No, but she was very taken with that, and the image of Groucho is him answering a telephone, with eight arms or something. Yeah. I always thought, the Beatles kind of knocked off that idea, because the original title of Help was 8 Arms to Hold You, and there's a picture of an Indian god with 8 arms, and it looks just like Dalí's drawing of Groucho. Don't know if that's really what happened, but it does look a lot like it.
And she also said that she noticed that Dalí would sketch different parts of Harpo at a time. So one arm, elbow, part of his neck, and then put them together. So it wasn't one picture.
The other thing about Susan, I love when Bill talks about this, because it's very funny. That harp that Dalí said to Harpo, we get asked, where is it? Well, I'll just say it to get Bill started on this. Susan was what you would call a very practical person. That harp wasn't playable. She got tired of looking at it. Where'd it go, Bill?
It went into the garbage out in the back. Yeah, she said, oh, Christ. She always started a sentence with, oh, Christ, Oh, Christ, who would want that? And anyway, it's awful. I don't want to look at it. Get it out of here. Well, there must be somebody, a garbage man, who is a very wealthy fella now, because it went into the garbage, that particular harp. And one other thing, I'm thinking of full circle here. When I was about 6, 7 years old, I noticed this 5, 6 page Xerox copy of a thing called Giraffes on Horseback Salad. I must be, little would I know that I'm sitting here with the author and that we're talking about this today, because it would be 76 years ago was the first time I laid eyes on it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't particularly care. But every now and then I would look at it years later and so forth, and I had a copy of it for a long time, but I never really thought much of it. And here we are, we're talking about this wonderful book that this gentleman wrote. And it's strange how things happen. 76 years ago, I'm probably the only living survivor of seeing something that long ago.
Well, I like to point this out because I know you wouldn't do it because you're so modest, but Bill is the only guy left who's worked with Groucho, Harpo, and Chico. He's worked with all of them.
Professionally.
Yeah.
Well, it gives you an idea what an altajacar I am.
Hey, wait a minute. In this neighborhood, you're a kid.
Aren't we having fun through happy hour?
I'll say this. Because of Bill, I got to know his mom. I had written to his mom before I ever met her. Back in 1993, I put out a book of Groucho's lost writings, which I sent to Susan. And, I wrote to her. I didn't ask what you thought of the book. Many years later, when I got to know her and I was spending time with her, I noticed my book on her shelf. And I said, did you like the book? I just, in a bold moment, I asked her what she thought of my Groucho book. And this is, of course, way before my other Marx Brothers book came out. And she goes, oh, I really liked your book. In fact, I liked it much more than I liked Groucho. She did not pull any punches. Bill knows this better than anybody. Susan pretty much shot from the hip.
Oh, boy, did she ever. Yeah. She had an opinion about everybody and everything, except she would never say anything about herself. She was very guarded about herself. But you ask her opinion about baseball or politics or whatever it might be, or friends, and she'd have an answer for you. And she was the first gal to break through the good old boys group down here with regard to education. She was the first woman trustee at College of the Desert, and she was in a Palm Springs school board for on and off 35 years. So she really put in some time, and quite a lady. And yeah, you got her from the hip, that's for sure.
I want to tell you something about Susan in baseball, because you just reminded me of this. Wonderful. I stayed with her for a couple of weeks. We were working on the book. It was the fall of 1995 in particular, because the baseball playoffs run, and she loved watching baseball. She had an enormous TV that she sat way too close to, because when I was a kid, they said, don't sit too close to the TV. But Susan sat pretty close to this very large TV. And the Seattle Mariners are playing the Cleveland Indians, which is of no consequence in the story, but the Mariners' second baseman made a couple of really bad errors that cost them that game. And she decided, because of the way the fans were booing him, she was going to root for him, and she now supports the Seattle Mariners. Because she loved the underdog.
That's right.
Since Dave is here, and he's a huge baseball fan, it was Joey Cora.
Who happens to be, yeah.
He's around still, but that told me something about Susan. If somebody had a problem or was in trouble, she'd come to their defense. And I think that's probably why she was such a good education advocate, because she was looking out for kids who had disadvantages. She always talked about that. And this is years after she was done with the whole school board and the Board of Education thing. It's just the kind of person she was. And I just grew to really, really adore her. And when Bill said she didn't talk much about herself, that's really what was hard about trying to get her to write a book. And she wanted to do it. She had started and had a lot of trouble, and Bill actually asked me to help her. And I said, yeah, if she wants to, I'd love it. And it took about 3 weeks to get her to realize that nobody's going to want to read a book about her run for the school board. But I said it was interesting, but they need to know who you are first. So the way we got her out of her shell to talk about her movie career was a strange thing. I borrowed some 16mm prints of old movies she was in before they were ever available on like DVD or even VHS at the time. And she just started laughing at herself. And I found a movie she did with John Wayne in 1931 called The Range Feud. And I played it for her, and she wanted to watch it again because she said, stop it, we'll watch it later. I'm laughing too hard, I'm going to hurt myself. she was just amazed at how bad the movie was. She wasn't bad at all, but she was convinced she would have ruined the career of anybody who was in a movie with her. And I said, no, John Wayne did okay for himself, Susan. You didn't hold him back. But once we got her watching her old movies, suddenly she remembered stories about things that happened on the set. I said, wow, we got to watch more movies, Susan. There was, nope, the ball game's on in 10 minutes. Stop the movie. But that was Susan. And again, Josh, when I found the piece of tape of her talking about Dalí, I was overjoyed because I remember talking to her about a lot of things. That, geez, I hope I have that on tape. And for your fortune, I did. So yeah. I just loved Susan. So this is a great excuse to talk about her because the Dalí story is part of her story.
It's going to be your next book, I think.
Yeah, we'll finish the Susan manuscript. Yeah,
graphic novel of Susan.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, she's a real big part of the Dalí story because she was with them at all the times they met.
Yeah, yeah. Huh? She was very practical, and Dad was completely impulsive, and it was a great combination. It really was. And I want to congratulate you on this book. It's really a book that may not be for everyone, but it really is for anyone.
It's kind of like a great accompaniment to mind-altering substances of your choice. Now that's something you could put on the back cover.
Yes.
Next
yes.
edition.
Well, you know, part of my goal was to make it something that was accessible because yes, Dalí's original idea was pretty wild, and I don't think he even really knew where he was going with it. He wanted to make a crazy surrealist movie in Hollywood. But my whole theory was, well, what if it had actually been made in 1937? How would, you know, the powers that be have shepherded it to make it accessible for anyone in some way? And so what I did was, when writing the narrative for how it would have been possible, I brought Irving Thalberg back to life. For those of you who are Marx Brothers fans, you know that Thalberg was a real ally to the Marx Brothers, and the Marx Brothers respected him, and he was the studio head. But he passed away very young. He was the youngest studio head. Right?
Yeah, he actually died as they were about to start filming A Day at the Races.
Right.
About 38 or 39.
36. He died in September of 36. Incidentally, not a coincidence, Harpo finally married Susan 3 weeks after Thalberg's death. He decided he wasn't getting any younger.
Yeah.
Are we?
No, that's true. Harpo was probably pushed much closer to doing that because the death of Thalberg really affected him.
Yeah.
And Susan even said that. Susan talked about Harpo never felt his mortality until Thalberg died.
It Groucho pretty good too.
Yeah, I mean, Susan was pretty straightforward about that. In my book, I have an account of Harpo and Susan's courtship and wedding, lifted basically from her memoirs that never got published. And she said Harpo felt like an invincible young man until the moment he found out that Thalberg died.
I felt that the Thalberg story was really important and very meaningful, and I thought it was that important moment in the story of Dalí and Harpo that was going to help make sense of what the movie, because if I brought Thalberg back and you know, what if Thalberg had have still been the head of the studio when Dalí and Harpo had taken the script in? It probably wouldn't have happened, but there would have been a better chance that Thalberg would have been like, you know, humored it along further to the point where maybe some other writers would have been brought on to make it Thalbergian. And so I, you know, through the writing, the adapting of Dalí's notes into the screenplay that I wrote that we then translated into the graphic novel, the bumper sticker on, you know, on my wall was, what would Thalberg do? And that's how Dalí's very strange and unusual ideas was turned into something that really every one of you could enjoy in some way. And there's a very specific story there. It's a love story, and it's about two people from two different worlds. And what I realized as I was writing it is that it actually was very much about Dalí. The idea of these two worlds, a world of the fantastical and a world of the real and the logical, going to war with each other. Dalí was in this very strange place when he met Harpo, and I feel like Harpo was a real comfort to him at a time when he was feeling a lot of insecurity. You don't think about Dalí as someone who was insecure, who was questioning his place in the universe, but at this point in his life, he really was. He had hit this sort of glass ceiling, and he felt like, is this as far as it's going to be for me? Is this it? And I think like he kind of got lost in, and he was a refugee from his own country, and he'd been kicked out of his own surrealist movement. He was not,
I have a Dalí question for you, because I didn't realize that I hadn't asked you this before. Do you think Dalí had a complete understanding of the characters the Marx Brothers took on in their movies? Because I don't think he did. Because he's given Harpo a fairly straight and partially ethnic role, which...
I don't think he bothered with...
Yeah, I mean...
with those trivial things.
You can hide a lot of missing knowledge by being a surrealist.
Yeah.
You could just say, that's the way I see it. And I wonder if Dalí had done that much research.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that, and unfortunately I'm going to have to reveal one of my little tricks.
Uh-oh.
But I will to you guys.
Do we want to see how the sausage is made?
Right. No, so basically I had to make an artistic decision on something I wasn't sure about. And because it wasn't clear in Dalí's notes, it wasn't totally clear if he had intended the lead character to be Harpo, the Spanish businessman that talked, like if that was Harpo, the character of Jimmy, or if Jimmy was a different character and Harpo was Harpo, because he never mentions. He will mention Jimmy, but he'll also mention Harpo in these notes. So to answer your question, I think he did have a good understanding, but I think he was playing around with these narrative ideas that he wasn't sure how they were going to play out. And then what I did in my book is I made an executive decision for the sake of
Well, they're all dead,
story.
so you can.
Yes, and you guys approved it, so...
We didn't really read
it. That's cool too. Whatever works. But, so yeah, no, it wasn't clear in his notes if this very un-Harpo character was going to be played by Harpo, because he said Harpo was going to star in it. But then there's this character of Jimmy that really is the protagonist. So what I did, long story short, is I actually used that as a narrative, as a narrative tool, and I decided that this whole Giraffes on Horseback Salad story is really the origin story of Harpo, the character, and of Salvador Dalí, so that the character of Jimmy was Salvador Dalí and was Harpo Marx, but also wasn't Harpo Marx. How about that?
My mind is blown. Well, one thing I'm sure Dalí didn't know, and Bill can tell you about this too. In the early days of the Marx Brothers in vaudeville, and even when they became Broadway stars, they considered Harpo to be the principal comedian at one point. And Harpo was the star of the show. And then as the Marx Brothers became movie stars and later Broadway and more verbal, Groucho came to the front and became the principal comedian. But there's a really strange thing. When the Marx Brothers were first negotiating to get into the movies, it was in the later silent years, around 1926, 27, and they announced they were going to be in a movie in which Harpo would play Napoleon. And the crazy thing about this is Groucho played Napoleon in Alsatias for 2.5 years. So Harpo was considered the guy on which to focus a movie. I mean, did you want to say something about that? Because I know when I first met you, we talked a lot. We talked about the reviews that Harpo saved, where he was the main guy in the reviews.
Yeah. No, you said it very well.
Okay, then I'll just take you home now.
Well, I actually, since I have this opportunity
no,
with Bill up here, I did want to ask him about Harpo as the painter.
Go.
That is something that I was hoping you'd, say something about.
Well, when he was recovering from his first heart attack, the doctor said, you can't work for a year. So he went back to painting. He had painted a little bit in the 30s, and he went back to satisfy his curiosity, as I think Alan Sherman once said, Harpo had the good sense to never have grown up. And he just went ahead and did what he felt like doing, and he had to find something creative to do, or self-discovering. And so he painted, and he painted, and he painted for a year. And a lot of his stuff went to charities and to hospitals, and never took a dime, except on occasion he would take a dime and then send it off to the rightful charities. He had a fellow friend of his by the name of Al Hart, who created City National Bank. I don't know how many of you people have ever known about City National Bank. He's quite influential. And one day Dad said to him, I said, you see this painting? What do you think it's worth? And Al said, I don't know, about $500 maybe. And Dad said, write out a check to your favorite charity for $3,500 and it's yours. And he got him to do it. Dad just loved to be creative in his own fascinating way. He was curious about music. This is a guy who never read a note of music in his life, and yet he learned Ravel's Introduction and Allegro. He learned all kinds of French Impressionist music by ear. He was always at the harp every morning, 3 hours a day, whether he was working or not that day. He would go in and he practice, and he just loved the experience of putting the harp on his shoulder. And if you've ever done this, or you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, you should. Find a harp one day, put it on your shoulder, and just strum the strings. And all the vibrations go right through your body. And it's the most sensual, magnificent, almost erotic experience. And he loved to play the harp. Sometimes he would take one chord and he would play it over and over again and sense the vibrations. He was really quite in tune with his inner self. And that's why he did so many wonderful paintings, some good, some, okay, but it didn't matter. It was him self-expressing, and he did that all of his life. And then when he went back to work, and then he had a second heart attack, he did some more. So he put out quite a volume of work, and it settled him. It gave him peace. He could sit in the studio for 8 hours and not come out, just finally walk out and say, when's dinner? And that's it. He was very much at peace with himself, especially doing painting.
I know you asked him to talk about painting, but you were talking about the harp, and something occurred to me. Can you tell about when you worked with him on his albums for Mercury Records? You did 2 albums with Harpo in the late 50s. I remember always the story about you helping him keep time.
He gave me something that I wish parents would give their children more of, and that is validation. You find something in your kid that you think they might be interested in, and without pounding it into them, you just guide them. And he did that with me. He knew I had musical talent when I was young, and by the time I was 16 years old, I was his arranger-composer. And when I was 17, we did our first album together, where I did all the harp arranging and a lot of the orchestration. And this particular album was done, I think, in 1956 or 57. And I had just been 1 year in school back east, and then I came out. And one day we were rehearsing a song that Harry Ruby, wonderful writer, Dad wanted to do this song, but he had to learn how to do it. And so I taught him the best way I knew how, and we went into the recording studio. And the song happened to be Thinking of You. And it goes, da, 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 thinking of you. Well, he couldn't get the rhythm right. He got the melody right on the harp, but he just couldn't get it. And he said, Bill, I tell you what, on our next take, you get down and lie on the floor and look up through the harp strings, and I'll look down at you, and you conduct me when I'm supposed to play the next note after the next note, which I did. And you know, it was a take. Da, 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 da.
Well, we just had to finish with the story where Bill's on the floor.
I've been there before, believe me.
So, are we supposed to take any questions?
Oh.
I don't know. No? What?
I
think the cat's out of the bag. I think we're going to have to now.
I have no money.
Wait, Bill has a question.
I have no money in this at all. And I also have no money.
Why don't you take that microphone down there and talk to this man?
These are two of the finest books that
no, we're going to bring. Can you bring that microphone
about
to
the
him?
Marx Brothers? Wonderful, and of course Rob's book, For the Three Musketeers, is a
on sale at a book table near you.
Okay, questions. Yeah.
If you have a loud, booming voice, or Josh will bring the microphone.
Thank you. Bill, thank you very much for coming. Got a question. A few months ago, we saw a film, Laurel and Hardy. It was the later years of Laurel and Hardy. And the Marx Brothers are a national treasure. Is there an opportunity, do you think there's going to be a film about the Marx Brothers coming up in maybe the next 5 years?
Maybe. Trying to turn my book into one. And that's all we can say about it right now. We're trying to do that.
We're trying to do it, but the early years in vaudeville and how they became the Marx Brothers.
It's in the works, if we can get somebody with lots of money to make it.
The Marx Brothers, their jokes. Do you think that the jokes today, for the younger generation, is that politically correct, or is that too much for the young people today?
Well, I don't think they focus as much on the human condition as much as the jokes in the past. We're now getting a lot of political jokes, jokes that are of the immediacy, but the brothers still are good because they poke fun at our behavioral mistakes as human beings, and that works for everybody. So we'll see what happens.
You know, I just want to, because that's a very important question.
Yeah.
People are now looking back at entertainers from 100 years ago and deciding if they're currently acceptable. And I think that's a very slippery slope and a huge mistake, because I just read something last week about sports teams are not going to play Kate Smith singing God Bless America anymore because she recorded That's Why Darkies Were Born in 1936, which is a song from 1931 originally sung by a black man named Paul Robeson.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. If you really want to find something offensive in something, you can. On the other hand, you could just enjoy it for what it is or not watch it. So I don't really buy into this whole nonsense that we're going to go analyze people from 100 years ago. Oh, well, I wasn't doing it for that, but I'm glad you agree. I mean,
that's enough.
It's really silly. I mean,
okay,
guys.
By the way,
I just want to say this.
This is my day, so you're going to have to give that kind of clap at least once before the end of this. I got to clap that big. Okay?
Presumably, we're all Marx Brothers fans, or going to be after today. Groucho references the song That's Why Darkies Were Born in Duck Soup. I would hate to think that somebody wants to go edit Duck Soup, which has survived intact for over 80 years. So can we just please not encourage people to do that sort of thing. That's it. Not necessary. We don't want to offend Josh. It's his day. But thank you for asking that question, because it was my only chance to ever pontificate on it.
I'm not going to give you a chance to pontificate anymore. I have a two-part question. You will.
Be careful, because that question was for him.
Right. Being a lifelong Marx Brothers fan, a question. Boy, a little boy, were you ever tempted to copy any of your father's routines? Did you ever try to entertain him as a little boy might entertain his father and make him laugh? Part one. Part two, what do you think of the show Minnie's Boys?
Did I see Minnie's Boys?
Yeah.
Yes.
How did the family feel about that?
I thought that the first act should have been the second act, and they should have done something with the first act. It was almost okay for me, but I was very glad for that they even thought to do it. But it's not a great piece of work. The second act should have been, they didn't need the second act. They should have ended it with the first act when they finally made it to Broadway. And they should have started the first act in Europe, bringing the family over to Ellis Island. That's my feeling about that. And the other?
The other question is, you as a boy, were you ever tempted to entertain your father by copying any of his routines?
I never wanted to do anything better or like my dad when I was a kid, because I didn't want to embarrass him. Okay? I defer.
No.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm a very big Bill Marx fan.
Me too.
Yeah.
And about him.
By the way, if you didn't know, Bill was a Juilliard School of Music graduate. And he scored stuff in Hollywood. If you want to read a great book, read Harpo Speaks. The real hero of that book is the mom. If you want to read a book about poverty to the pinnacle, that's it. Great story. And then if you like to hear about some famous people, especially around here, Bill Marx has got a book called Son of Harpo Speaks. And a lot of fun. Last time I was in the house, I had that question for Bill. I'd walk out, and as I recall, I kept seeing these original Andy Warhol paintings. Do you still have them, Bill?
Susan Rises Again. The Warhol painting that he was speaking of, Susan decided she didn't want it anymore. And I gave it back to her, and she gave it to, I think, Marcus Lowe, who produced Night in Casablanca.
David Lowe, Marcus Lowe's son.
David Lowe, Marcus' son, yeah, the son. That's what happened to that.
Nice gift.
Yeah. Well, I know my mother was not one for memorabilia. She didn't know much about that stuff. She didn't care. She just wanted to get down to the nitty-gritty on stuff.
She would have been a terrible art appraiser.
Yeah.
Is there any story behind this painting in particular? Anything you can tell about this particular painting? My favorite?
Well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, the man was nuts.
I mean, was this later Harpo?
Yes, this was, yeah. I have to believe that, at least he told me, he said, well, I was thinking things in my mind, and I just decided to do a psychological study of things that I think about. And you can't see it, but from there, but he's got little things like right here. Well, there's a naked lady on a palm tree, and then there's an Arabic guy here.
There's a cat.
And there's a cat, and there's the Arabic guy has a sign on his head saying, "You pay 6%."
It actually says that.
Yeah. And over here he says, "I paid 7%. I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
And look, there's like a fish head, and there's a flying turtle, and there's the sheep on the tree limb. That was one of my favorite things.
That's great. And right down here, I mentioned Al Hart before to you, the president of City National Bank. And right here he says, "Al, please make it 5.5%. He's got a guy playing the mandolin and birds all over the place.
While you have the chance, take a closer look at that on your way out. It's pretty wild.
It's my favorite painting ever. Really.
Penguins, a naked lady on a ski slope. I don't know. There was all kind.
You could look at it for a long time and come up with your own story. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, I think we've covered it pretty well.
You can actually stare at it for hours, and there's new things that come up all the time. This is the one
thing that always made me nervous. I don't know why. I guess those are the demons that we all live with. Some of us live with our demons, and some of us live by our demons. And Dad lived with his, I guess. Certainly not by them.
Bill, how long did it take him to do the picture?
How long did it take? I can't give you an answer. You knock these things out in a month or two.
That's one of his larger works. He's got a lot of Harpo did a lot of small paintings that he would give away to like hospital patients, or if he was doing a television show, he'd give one out to the audience member or something. So there's a lot of Harpo paintings that are probably like 9 by 12, and we don't even know how many are out there because he just routinely gave them away. And there's also some very beautiful large ones that Josh showed in his presentation that are all over the walls in Bill's house. And I mean, I've got 2 of the little ones that I acquired over the years from people who had either gotten them from Harpo or somebody's father got them from Harpo. So there's many, many little ones out there. When I was living in New York, I knew Kitty Carlisle Hart a little bit. And she had about 4 or 5 Harpo paintings in her apartment, which I don't know what became of them. I presume her son got them. But he was a great friend of Moss Hart, so he would just, whenever he'd go visit him in Bucks County, he'd bring him a painting. And Kitty ended up with those.
I'd like to link your website. You have a website.
Yeah.
And I'd like to link it up with harposplace.com.
Well,
we can do that.
I don't know how to do that.
I actually already have done that to your site. Now you have to do it to mine.
Okay. I don't know how to do it.
But if either of you have done it to mine.
It's hindsight.
MarxBrothers.net.
You're on mine.
Oh, good. Or else I'm not coming to this thing.
That's okay. Nobody show up anyway.
Well, so I'm really hoping that at some point that I can get Bill and Robert to help me figure out a way of doing a gallery exhibit of some of Harpo's work. I would love to do that at some point somewhere.
We're hoping to do that too with a larger thing on the Marx Brothers, but we could talk, but not here.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I know I'm going to do one here, but I want to sneak one in for Josh.
Okay, yeah, you're allowed.
Can you talk about why a graphic novel was what you chose as your method to realize this project?
Well, it was the most obvious way of bringing a movie to the page. But we had to kind of rethink the graphic novel structure in order to accomplish what we wanted, which was more like reading a movie as opposed to a graphic novel, which has its own logic to it. We wanted it to feel more like you were watching the movie on the page. So it's sort of like a hybrid of a graphic novel and our own concoction, I guess. But also, I grew up reading graphic novels and have always been a fan. And I think part of the reason I like graphic novels was because they were like storyboards for a movie. And because I come from a film background, went to film school, I understood that. And I felt that that would be a good canvas for telling the story on.
Bill, oh, hi there. You know, you've spoken of Dad as an actor, as a comedian. Pardon? Okay. And with his music and his art. I've seen him in many professional golf documentaries with the pros, okay, such as Sam Snead, Arnold Palmer. Can you tell us anything about his athletic prowess in that field?
Well, he was an avid golfer. He studied books on golf. It was his favorite thing to do when he didn't, in fact, he would even make time to go out and play golf. And he played with Snead in a show called Celebrity Golf. When Tamarisk was created out here in 1952, he got the first professional golfer to be the pro that year. He got Ben Hogan. And just for the first year, that way they could sell memberships and all that. And he knew all these wonderful, wonderful people, Ellie Vines. We're going back to the 50s, but these guys were really top-notch. And he was just a student of the game. And whenever I came down here to visit him, I was already up in LA, we'd go out and play golf, find a way. And I guess you guys all know the story, don't you, about time we were rehearsing. And he said, I don't feel like rehearsing anymore. Let's go out and play some golf. And I said, okay, well, all right. He said, okay, I'm going to go and get the golf cart. I'll come around the front. It's summer. There's no dress code, so don't worry about it. I'll pick you up in 5 minutes. So he trundles up in the golf cart, and I get in, and we start to drive off to the first tee, and I notice he doesn't have any clothes on. And because he was about 73, 74 years old at that time, I didn't want to make him think that I would be thinking that he was beginning to lose it. So I didn't say anything. I just went straight ahead. We went to the first tee, and he gets out and he hits the ball, and I hit, and we get in the car and keep going. And we did this all the way through the entire Tamarisk Golf Course. Now, there weren't a lot of people there because it was the summer, it was 110, and had he not been famous, he would have been a nudist. He just loved the freedom. And anyway, occasionally, because it was so hot, he would jump off the cart and jump into a neighbor's swimming pool that was adjacent to the fairway, take a dip, get back in the car and tootle back off. And we played an entire 18 holes of golf that way. I think I'm the first person that has ever played golf with a man who was totally nude. And I related this in 1985 on a show with David Letterman. And concluding the interview that I had, Letterman said, I don't think I ought to ask you where he kept his tees. Anyway, it's on YouTube if you want to see it. It's
Check it out. It's funny.
Anyway.
So I think we're going to be wrapping it up, but I did have one closing thing I wanted to share with you guys. And actually, Bill, you segued earlier into it, actually, and so it's something I've been wanting to share with you, actually. So 4 months before the book came out, I decided to challenge myself with one more thing. I also had the time. I was just waiting for the book to come out. I had this vision that when the book came out, I would play the harp live on stage with Harpo on a video. And so I decided to take up harp lessons.
You did?
And I did, 4 months ago. I got a harp teacher in Austin, Texas, and I rented a harp, $50 a month. That was the only way my wife would let me do it, because they're really expensive.
And he told her it was 35.
I did tell her it was 35. And I took harp lessons 3 times a week for 4 months. My goal was to learn one Marx Brothers song that I could at least in some way make it look like I was playing harp with Harpo. And you are absolute, what you said is so true. The second I pulled that harp up, the first time, it was this comfort, it was this relaxation, and even when I wasn't in the mood to practice, every night before I went to sleep, I would put it on and I would go through my 4 lines that took me 4 months to get down okay. But I mean, it was so relaxing and so enjoyable, and I'm going to continue doing it. And so I'm going to end with this little Marx medley, and I want to thank everyone for coming, and I want to thank Bill and Robert for everything they've done for me and the Marx Brothers and for all of us.
I love good music. So do I. Let's get out of here. Sit down. I've got to stay here. But there's no reason why you folks shouldn't go out into the lobby till this thing blows over. That's a wise quack. You keep your bill out of this. How would you like it if I butted into your affairs and laid an egg?
Everyone says I love you. The cop on the corner and the burglar too. The preacher in the pulpit and the man in the pew says I love you.
Everyone says I love you. The great big mosquito when he stings you. The fly when he gets stuck on the fly paper too says I love you. Every time the cow says a moo, she's a making the bull feel very happy too. And the rooster when he holler cock-a-doodly-doodly-doo says I love you. Christopher Colombo, he write the Queen of Spain a very nice little note. And he's right all over you, baby, and then he get himself a great big boat. He's a wiser guy, what do you think Colombo do? When he's come here in 1492, he say to Pocahontas, atcha-fatcha-gatcha-goo. That means, you little son of a gun, I love you.
everyone, the whole world through. The king in the palace and the peasant too. The tiger in the jungle and the monkey in the zoo says I love you. I did it! Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Robert.